Tonight, we're honored to welcome Tim Wu, celebrating the release of his new book, The Age of Extraction: How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threaten Our Future Prosperity. The world today is shaped by a handful of technology platforms, tools that offer extraordinary convenience and connection, while also functioning as some of the most powerful engines of wealth extraction in history. And when the public or policymakers request accountability or regulations, Big Tech's response often seems to mirror Hal in 2001: A Space Odyssey when he says, "I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that." In The Age of Extraction, Wu examines how these platforms have concentrated economic and political power, reshaped markets, and altered the social fabric itself. But you know what the Who says: meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Tim Wu is the Julius Silver Professor of Law, Science, and Technology at Columbia Law School. He served in the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Technology and Competition Policy, and he's best known for coining the term net neutrality. He is also the author of The Master Switch and The Attention Merchants, works that have helped define how we think about power in the digital age. Wu will be joined in conversation with Cecilia Kang, an award-winning technology reporter for the New York Times and co-author of the best-selling book, An Ugly Truth: Inside Facebook's Battle for Domination. And we'd also like to thank Groundwork Collaborative for donating books for this event. Books are available by the signing table right over here. So please join me in welcoming Tim Wu and Cecilia Kang.
Wow, leave it to Tim Wu to fill up a bookstore on a Tuesday night and on a election night.
Is there anything else going on today?
I know, yeah. Is there anything, especially that, and some notable guests, Senator Markey in the back, a lot of your old friends. There's I don't even know if we can say you're a former, Becca. She is an FTC commissioner, Becca Slaughter, here, who just ran the New York City Marathon. So, okay, actually, let's get back to the Tim show. So, Tim, welcome to Washington.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. It's great to, I was born here in D.C. and obviously I come here now and then to work. And it really does feel in some ways like coming home.
Yeah, I think a lot of people here are either your friends or your civil adversaries, perhaps, and others who are just interested in your work. So, as we learned in the intro, this is not your first book. In fact, I think this is your fourth or your fifth, right?
Yes. In fact, I think I came here. I should have pointed for The Curse of Bigness last, which was a book about antitrust. Yeah.
And in reading your book, The Age of Extraction, it feels like this is an extension of some of the ideas that you've been developing over the years, maybe another big link in the chain. Why now?
Yeah. I mean, I got into writing this book partially because I became interested partially because I got older, and I got interested in what happened to this sort of dream of the early internet that I think many of us really deeply believed in. What happened to the idea that the internet was going to make everybody rich, that it was going to spread democracy to every corner of the earth, that even more generally about the 90s, that we were on the cusp of an age of peace, prosperity, endless democracy, good times for everyone as far as the eye can see. I think there's really something to going back and trying to understand, what you thought and where we were going, and then what actually happened. So in a way, the structure of this book is, here's what we thought, here was the plan, but then, try sort of a diagnosis of what went wrong, with the idea, and I'd like to maintain. I was thinking the introduction was kind of dark. It is a kind of an optimistic book in the sense of this meaning of optimism, which is I do have a deep faith in the ability of this country and also of humanity to learn from our mistakes. And, that gives me optimism. I do think that we had some very powerful ideas of how life could be in back in the 90s, early thousands. And I just want to try to figure out kind of where we went astray and see if we can sort of recapture. This is starting to sound like Portlandia, recapture the dream of the 90s or whatever. But I do think that this is a good time for a reckoning about, in tech, in many other fields, as to kind of where we went, I think, where we went wrong over the last 25 years. So that was some of what led me to write this book now.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, let's diagnose, or at least let's pick apart, what do you mean by the age of extraction? Can you talk a little bit about the title and what is being extracted?
Yes, that's a great question, given that it's the title of the book. The word extraction is actually a technical word in economics, and I guess it refers to the ability to take much more value or wealth for a product or service than its intrinsic value. It's like much sort of to take great in excess of the price. That's sort of the technical meaning. More viscerally, I think it's that sensation you have when you really need to get somewhere and you have to buy an airline ticket the same day. And, there's empty seats on that plane, but they've kind of got you, and you're going to pay whatever they want. That kind of sense of extraction, even though it's free to them. Maybe sort of the feeling you have when DC has this too, also New York, where you look at this terrible apartment and realize they're going to rent it to you for $5,000 a month or whatever it is, or that ability, just like of the scarcity there. Then I think that in a way, I think that capitalism has changed and business have changed during our lifetime. I'm not saying things were like somehow perfect in other times, but I do think that a lot of business in our time is looking for sort of pain points, places where you have economic power, and trying to take as much you can in those moments. I think that has evolved. I teach at the business school also, and at Columbia Business School, and I feel like that has become almost a dominant method, hunting for extraction possibilities. You think about like pharmaceutical drugs. I know we're wandering off from tech platforms, but you like, okay, look at this. There's this rare drug. These people need it. Let's turn the dial. And so I feel in some ways that's the kind of age we're living in, where people sort of feel they're being extracted. It's not only money. It also refers to the model of the tech platforms. I think over the years, the tech platform business model has changed. As I say in the book, it has moved from being something like a tool or a catalyst of human function, and more trying to kind of make sure you never leave and make sure you stay there. Captivity has kind of become the dominant business model. Herding of a unusual and very the herding of a species, us, into these areas, and then once you've got people on the platform and you keep them there, you can. It's to change the metaphor a little bit like a casino. The house never loses. Buyers and sellers are on the platforms. You can take fees. You can take data, very valuable data, build new products. You can, you can basically extract, or another word would be mine or harvest human attention. You can sell advertising. So that's what I said I'm saying. And the weird part is the resource is us. We're the ones, and sellers, buyers and sellers are on there, but all subject to extraction.
So you mentioned a few times the platform and the role of the platform and the evolution of the platform. In the book, you go all the way back into ancient history and the Greek agora, and how just like supply, demand, and economics, somehow along the way, things became awfully distorted, and we got to this point of an extraction economy.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, and what was it that in modern times has normalized this behavior of going to the airline counter and it being okay to extract every single penny from an individual?
Yeah. When I was starting to write this book, sometimes when I write a book, I have a sentence that motivates me or is like somehow key to the book. And for this book, the idea when I was first writing it was everything has to happen somewhere. I don't know why. I just had this like everything has to happen somewhere sentence. But I kind of had a meaning in it, which is it occurred to me that every civilization has to have spaces where things happen. I was in Rome last week, take our kids around, and there's in the Roman Forum. You go back there it all is. There's the markets, the places people bought meat and food. There's the temples. There's the law courts. They're called basilicas. There's all this stuff is right there. So things have to happen somewhere. And my view is that this will eventually get to your question. My view is that the places where things happen profoundly shape the kind of civilization you live in. I think that is true, and that some kind of there's a reason the Greeks celebrated this agora in the center of the town where everyone would come to vote and people would sell and buy and everything. I think these spaces, they have a lot to do with free speech and expression and whether you can speak or not. They also have a lot to do with whether an independent class can sell. If you are a farmer and independent farmer and you have extra crop, whether you can sell the surplus. So I think platforms have always been really important. And it's obvious that the platforms in our times are the big tech platforms, and that's one big change, that they're not physical. But almost as big a difference is that these are private platforms, privately owned, and I don't think necessarily people run them are evil or anything, but their goals are to make as much money as possible. I think the Roman Forum was kind of beautiful, but didn't have this ambition to run the world. Maybe the people there did, but not the actual forum. So this is a real change. Is that I guess the technical phrase would be there's been a privatization of the market infrastructure, which we do have sometimes. The stock market is a private entity. The trains, but we always, when we've done that, we've always thought this is kind of dangerous, or we need to be really careful about letting this essential center of our economy or whatever be in private hands. In British common law, they'd be called public callings. They had special duties because these aren't normal companies. But we've kind of blinded by the smoke and mirrors of new technology, we sort of forget that these are the equivalent of the town squares of our time of whatever, and somehow we just say, oh yeah, some random dude can buy it and turn it into a propaganda engine, and that's fine. Or we couldn't have these things, and even though they're essential to commerce, there's no limit in how much they can take from the transactions. So we kind of lost sight of how public these entities are. Yeah.
Well, with tech, have they ever considered this to be public? When you look at Silicon Valley, I'm just recently reread Mark Andreessen's Tech Optimist Manifesto, and it was just the more private, the more hands off the government can be, the better, the more flowers will bloom. Has there ever been an argument for?
That's an interesting document. Leon Wieseltier, who's here, said that is one of the most important primary documents of our time, and I think he's right. Particularly, people start to study the theology of technology and how grew to worship the beneficent technology as if it's a beneficent God. But that's an aside. Has there ever been? Yeah, I think we have plenty of examples where we have had technologies invented that we thought were absolutely key to commerce and our economy, but we couldn't just let them do whatever the hell they wanted. And in fact, many of the great boom times of our civilization have been on the back of essentially regulated networks. For example, the great building, we're talking about building, which is an obsession right now. The railroads obviously were the key developmental infrastructure of the 19th century. They're also private in this country, the public in other countries. But after a brief experimentation, people said, you can't just let them charge whatever they want. And you can't just let them treat some people differently. Everything comes to net neutrality, But you can't just let them say, okay, this town, how much do you want us to go buy your town? Give us money. Or the railroads in the United States. And then we eventually figured out common carriage. And you had this incredible boom time on top of the railroads. And then another example I'll use, the electrification starting in the 20s, 30s, 40s. Once again, no one said, okay, this is great new technology, but just let them say, oh yeah, how do you like having electricity? How about $10,000 a month? If the electric company could charge anything they wanted, why would they not just like turn up the bill until you know, whatever. I mean, I don't know. Or also just favor some people or another or different kind of things. But I think we've made a sort of grave mistake. We forget. Somewhere in the book, I say the platforms have kind of a main character syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, they've sort of forgotten they're the
laughed out
platform. They're supposed to be the hosts of everything else that happens. Right? There's brilliant people who work there and they've invented some great stuff. But like the electric company, who never said, oh, you know, the electric company's great and they're going to invent like everything in the future. They're going to invent the computer, you know, the air conditioner. It's like, no, they're going to provide this thing and other people are going to invent stuff. Right? And I somehow think we've forgotten that. You know, a lot of the arguments Andreessen makes are like, oh, okay, you know, you have to leave us alone so we can invent everything. But, you know, why is it, like, that's the main character syndrome problem. I guess what I'm saying is like, there's a lot of people who need to invent stuff. In fact, the whole computer industry was invented on top of the electric industry. So that's my answer.
No, thank you. I love when you said, I laughed out loud when I saw the main character syndrome with the platforms. That was very good.
You can tell I have young children because I get that up from somewhere.
So let's go into an example. Maybe Amazon, that was well documented in your book, of how distorted the market has become and how extractive it's become. Amazon, housing, it's not just tech. Mm-hmm. Why don't you give an example?
Yeah, I think the story of Amazon is a good one. In some ways, because it illustrates the promise, and in some ways, the early days, the sort of the dream of the 90s realized in some ways in the early days. So I feel like people may have forgotten this, but Amazon used to sell books. I don't know if it's good to talk about Amazon in a bookstore. It feels like bad karma. But anyway, Amazon used to sell books, and they used to be kind of like a store. Like they were not a market, if that makes sense. Like their thing was they had the books in a big warehouse, and the innovation was having a bigger warehouse and shipping it anywhere, and having a webpage. So that changed when they debuted their marketplace, which is really one of the most significant technologies of the last 20 years. First, it was just a few products. They expanded, and did a couple very clever and important things. If you read I went back and read all the old writings in the early thousands, and Jeffrey Jarvis and like all kinds of other things. And the big prediction was that eBay was going to like be the thing that changed retail forever. Retail did change; it just wasn't eBay. But what Amazon realized is that they had to make things really work for sellers. They're very focused on sellers, and among other things, they came up with. Someone maybe noticed that eBay's system of having to like duct tape your own packages and send them out wasn't working. So they got into order fulfillment. And by 2012, I think Amazon was kind of extraordinary. They had expanded to everything. They had figured out order fulfillment, and they were doing it at a very reasonable price. It was margin-wise between 15 and 20%. There was a seller fee, monthly fee. You have Amazon Prime. The sellers have Amazon Prime as well. It's a different version of it. But a very reasonable price, and a lot of people got in it during this period. And in some ways, as I said, I think it was a dream realized to an important extent. A lot of people decided to, people like returning veterans, people all over the country. I think I have a story in the book about a barber who starts selling his pomade online and builds it into a business, and people doing little things and their hobbies or whatever, and making decent money. And so you have this potential there, particularly if you're interested in the economics of the country, of this being a form of class redistribution too. Kind of a Brandisian, small businesses get to have their moment through this even better marketplace than any other we've ever had. So could be a real way of growing independent wealth, and it seems very significant to me. So that's 2012. And, if things had stayed this way, I probably wouldn't have written this book. But somewhere, and this is actually with all the platforms, the last 10 years really start to change things. And we can talk about a number of ways in which the business model changes. But Amazon, maybe it's, I don't know, they've got both sides. All the sellers, all the buyers. eBay is kind of left in the dust. Walmart doesn't really be target. They're not really able to chase them, and they basically establish, what I would describe as a monopoly position in online, this kind of online marketplace. I did sit at a congressional hearing once. Senator Mark, you may have been there, where the Amazon person said that they controlled merely 7% of the marketplace because you have to include every single shop in the world in there. Anyway, sorry, it's an antitrust joke. It's not very funny, but whatever. So they became like the place online, the sell by. No one get away from it. And then you just start to see they just start turning the dial. Come up with this fees, more those fees, everything. And the big innovation, the real moneymaker, was the sponsored results. Have you ever been on like Amazon and, you're searching for, I don't know, shoelaces, and then there's like all these sponsored results? Some might just seem kind of annoying. They don't really help you find things. That started to become an enormous profit source. In fact, from what I read, I believe there's some Amazon Web Services makes a lot of money too. But in terms of pure margin, very low cost and just total profit, I think that is the most profitable thing Amazon has. 10 million, 10 billion, 20 billion. You know how much it was last year? $57 billion earned from those little things, which is actually, it's a kind of, they call it advertising, double the amount made by every single newspaper in the world in advertising. So they have this little thing, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. But just a good example of just pure valueless extraction. Like, it makes things worse for consumers. We end up paying, $57 billion for something that makes search worse. So that's the Amazon story.
Yeah, and the extraction, as you said, is for consumers getting things served up to them, not necessarily being the best options, as well as small businesses perhaps getting squeezed.
I want to say it's the sellers too. Like, that's, it's usually invisible. Mm-hmm. For a long time we thought everything was free on the internet, but you didn't realize the other side of the market's the one who pays.
Right.
So just a small point.
So I liked how you mentioned how you went back and read what people were saying in the early 2000s, and just like all the optimism, and just, Google's going to set all information free, and, Facebook's going to connect the world in the most wonderful, beautiful ways. So I want to read to you what some of the quotes that I've heard recently from Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. AI will be the most important technology humanity has ever built, and could significantly accelerate scientific progress. It can allow one person to build a billion-dollar company. There are actually so many examples of this. We've all heard this. So it feels like there are echoes, and yet it feels like something's different with this wave of technology. Tell us, given the lessons learned, how you're viewing AI right now and in the paradigm of extraction.
Yeah, it's a great, very good question. And no, we only went 25 minutes before getting to artificial intelligence. I'm just kidding, because like many conversations, AI is a great topic. So first of all, I think there's, if I can talk about the early optimism of the internet, I think there's two views of it. One is that it was always cynical all along, and this was just kind of what you said in order to, these were sediments for suckers. You just kind of said this stuff, people felt good about themselves, and then you cashed in. But I think there was more to it. I think there was some true desire, and I think those periods are actually important, and that's why I talk about the AI. I'll leave this to the AI thing, but I think that's important. It's part of this country's nature to kind of have optimistic periods. One of my other books, The Master Switch, I was very interested in the early days of radio, the early days of film, and I believe there were well-intentioned people. I believe many of the founders of the big tech firms were well-intentioned. They also just had to be billionaires. Like, that was an important product of what they had to do. The only guy who really comes out from that history looking good, to me, my view, is Jimmy Wales, who, Jimmy Wales could have been as rich as he wanted, and he's like, yeah, but then Wikipedia's going to suck. To borrow my friend Corey's view, he didn't shitify. I guess he resisted that. So what do you do about the similar optimism in the AI phase? One thing I think is really interesting about our time it's unlike the internet era, unlike that sort of excitement about what we'd be able to do. I feel like most people don't. There's a small number of people really excited about AI. Most people talk about it are like, this is going to be terrible. And I sometimes wonder why that is, because like Americans are usually very excited about new technologies. I admit there's some small group. I could even do a poll. I've never tried this before. Who roughly is in the, boy, this is going to be so exciting and great. It's okay, just like put up your hand, so a couple people. And how many people are like, I kind of feel like this is going to take my job or suck or something terrible. Yeah, I feel like that's, maybe that's about typical. And I'm sort of, I've been wondering why this is. And I have a couple of theories, which it's not necessarily related to the book, just casually. I mean, I think I think humans are tool-using creatures. And the early internet seemed like it was going to be human augmentation. And it was going to be me, but better. I was going to be able to sell my product to more people. Or like Google was going to help me find stuff. Or, just computer general would be like a tool that would be really useful to me, I think. Or I could connect with other people in a way I hadn't before. And that was going to be really exciting. I think with AI that we prize our autonomy, and we're afraid of nobody likes something. I think it's about control. In other words, I think that you don't like a tool is something that you control. Well, this other thing, like despite the fact that you'll be able to build I think at least at this stage, people don't feel it's necessarily that loyal. And they kind of got burned by the tech platforms where they thought they were loyal or thought they were working for them, and then they started like turning on them. My own experience with that is I remember Twitter used to deliver things of people you followed. And then one day I was like, what am I reading? Where did this come from? Like, you know what I mean? Like I signed up to follow my friends to hear what they said about like corn. Also I think people think they don't really control it.
Right.
So I don't know. It could be other reasons.
Well, it also seems like with AI, there are more points of extraction, right? IP, maybe. Energy,
yes.
Your humanness in some ways. And yet it also sort of feels like the horse has so left the barn. Right. It's hard. So I'm sort of curious why you're optimistic, Tim, because it's just it is. Look at the markets. NVIDIA is valued at $5 trillion. OpenAI is going to IPO at around $1 trillion. Meta is going to spend $70 billion next year on AI. It's just so much money is captured in these companies, or lifting the entire market, and actually that's made us all beholden in some ways economically.
Yes,
sorry to be the doomsayer, but talk a little bit about that and like how it seems like things might be more at risk and worse.
I mean, that's got even crazier since I finished this book, which is there is that weird feeling that AI has become like the company town for the United States. And if it falls apart, we can't, we have to keep it going just for exactly the reasons you suggest. If I can just pick up on how AI could get people behind it, I'll answer your question in a second. I was thinking that if companies managed to successfully make it more tool-like, that people will like AI better. If you felt that the AI really worked for you and wasn't going to wander off or have its own agenda or replace you in your job, people might be more optimistic about it. But am I optimistic? What's interesting about the extraction point is I don't actually understand AI business models right now. It seems to me to sustain some of the valuation.
They may not either.
Yeah,
actually.
like that ChatGPT. But I have a theory. I do have a theory as to what it could be. So, it seems to me to sustain the valuation of ChatGPT, the monthly fee is going to have to go up, to like your rent or something, in order to sustain that value. But the other theory, which is possible, is that it's so valuable. This is the dark theory, is that it sustains and enforces the monopoly structure that's already there. You know what I mean? Like it's very, the one thing most tech firms fear is their own usurpation, their own succession. And I think some of the heavy investment is with the hope that by getting so far ahead of everybody else, the platforms can become indestructible, unreplaceable. It's a very antitrust way of thinking about it. One way or another. I think there's a few ways. They haven't figured them out. Maybe just because you just need and you become dependent and you feel like you can't do anything for yourself in your job or whatever. Maybe through emotional reliance technology. One of the things I did for this book, which was interesting, was I checked out all the companion AIs. And in fact, at some point I felt I had to tell my wife about this. I was like, like use all these things, what they're like. And there's obvious way. I mean, businesses have always wanted to get people to, feel attached to things. So maybe that's it. I don't know if they fully know, but partially me thinks is maybe we can keep this going, this whole valuation system, and not let margins go down through AI. That's one theory I have.
Well, so what do you think are? I'll go back to that. So we're seeing the biggest tech, like the same companies that are potentially like monopolies right now in the tech world, who are investing the most and who are positioning themselves the best to be the most dominant in the AI world. So what is the motivation for a company to change its behavior, to give up its main character syndrome? Or to it
doesn't have any motivation itself. The state has to tell it to change. I mean, it could culturally, but that's way past happening. I can't really see. Maybe there was a time where some of these companies felt that, we'd like just to supply a service for everybody else and like watch them go. Google in its early days said, look, we have a very simple job. You come to Google and then you leave and, that's it. We help you find other people who you might want. But I don't think the idea of it happening themselves, I think it has to involve some kind of humbling or humiliation. Some kind of, like when I think about what happened, I feel companies go through life cycles. And I do think, Microsoft was humbled in the 90s and they kind of changed a little bit. Now they're trying to take over again, but they sort of, for a while, changed, became more support-like in the world. IBM was humiliated. Not humiliated is the wrong word. IBM, had its ego broken at some point. They wanted to run everything, and they, I think, retreated to a more humble role. So something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so you are in Washington, and if that's the kind of action that'll take, where do you think the state of things are? The work that you did at the White House has been unwound. Cases are still active, however, and so there's that. Yeah, I mean, it's slow moving. It's so slow moving.
Yeah, I think that you watch this. I almost feel like you know, if anything, more about it as you report on it all the time. I think it's been a mystery because you have a party, the Republican Party, with a base that is kind of, populist, anti-monopoly. I mean, they may not have a strong theory of Section 7 of the Clayton Act, but they, feel like things have sucked for them in the last 20 years, and like they feel like there's a lot of big companies that seem to be getting rich, and they are quite hostile to tech. And I think that drove some of the electoral success. J.D. Vance was a big. I remember J.D. Vance praising Lena Khan's work, and those people were allies of ours when we were in the White House. And there was kind of a line of thought that thought, okay, this is going to continue through this administration. The first Trump administration started the first Google case, for example, and also the Facebook case. So there was a line of thought that thought, this is like just ongoing. And then it came the inauguration, and there everyone was sitting on the dais. I was like, what's this all about? Then there's been the state dinners. So there's this huge disconnect. As you said, all the cases are still going. The antitrust agencies, they're not staffed with people like the George W. Bush administration who just really never saw a case that they would want to bring. It's not like that. And the staff there, I think, is still dedicated to winning these cases and so forth. I just saw their filing for remedies in the Google case, pretty aggressive in the advertising, sort of aggressive filing. So there's that. So this is like one act. And then there's the presidency and the White House and this sort of very visceral sense that if you pay the right person, the case disappears. That is kind of our time.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been a jump between the two. There's like these two. It's like a quantum reality. Like if you were someone who just paid attention to law reports, you're like, boy, this is an aggressive antitrust. And if you just paid attention to who comes in out of the White House, you'd be like, boy, they're in love with the tech firms. So it's this mystery right now, and there hasn't been a jump between the two as far as I can tell. I know Mark Zuckerberg went. I don't know if you reported on this. Went into the White House to try to ask for the case to get dropped.
Yeah,
but
he
didn't
tried
get
to
dropped.
A settlement, right?
Didn't get dropped. Maybe he didn't know how to make who to pay the right way or something. But like the cases are still there. The cases are, and obviously there's been a lot of reporting on the oddities of, maybe that's the right word, of the interactions between the Justice Department and the
corruption.
The oddities, the breaking of traditional ethical boundaries. But it's also the case that, having been in government, most stuff just in government happens without, it just keeps going. Like, things, not, what you see is one tiny percentage of what goes on in the world. And the cases are still going. So I'm unfortunately not giving you a real answer to it.
So you
I'm
have
just
faith.
saying,
You're looking at the courts as...
I just think the mystery is there's a kind of business as usual thing going on, which is quite at odds with like what you see going on at state dinners.
Yeah.
And I don't saying I have faith in it. I think there's very good people working Justice Department and FTC who want to win these cases. So I think that. But whether the day of reckoning is happening or whether one day they'll just be like, sorry guys, nice effort, but it's over. Yeah.
So I know a lot of people here probably want to ask some questions of Tim. So there is a mic over there, and I will ask you one. So what message do you think you want to? There's a message clearly that you've articulated to regulators as well as the businesses. How about individuals? How does one feel like they have any sort of empowerment or agency in this world of extraction?
It's a hard question because, obviously these platforms, if you want to fully be independent, you become a little bit, it's a danger of becoming a hermit. You know what I mean? Like it's not like you can entirely divorce yourself. I personally tend to, use alternative versions of everything. Like I use Proton Mail or something. I'm going to advertise things. I use Brave Browser. I don't use the mainstream versions of things because I do think consumers choosing alternatives is an important force in the world.
I wish.
It's hard with Amazon. Particularly, Amazon's the hardest, frankly.
hard one.
Amazon is the hardest, particularly if you have children. But I do think that's an important force. And as always, Americans are, it's something very admirable about this country, is when there's a big winner, as opposed to the doubling down, they start to say, always a bunch of people will be like, I'm going to support the other guys. You know what I mean? Like, for years and years, if this is a weird example, late 70s, like the beer markets were all dominated by Budweiser and all these giant companies. So people are like, we're going to make our own beer. You know what I mean? And there's this kind of organic, like, we're going to do something different spirit that has always been part of the United States. It seems like weird to express that through your search engine but there's a little bit of that. So I think that's important. I think that's always alive. I also just said the broader sense, I do think it is possible to return to that, something more like the original vision of the internet, where the main platforms facilitate conduct for more and make more people rich. But we have to take decisive government action, much more than we contemplated when I was in government. And that is we need to have a reckoning here. And we've been kind of nibbling around the edges, but we need to go much further.
Great. All right, let's go to some questions. And if you want, you can introduce yourself too.
Oh, my name is Carolyn Poplin. I'm a doctor and a lawyer, and I was born in the 1940s. My parents were born in the 1920s, and each grandfather set up a small business. And I remember when things were different. I grew up during the New Deal, which nobody remembers anymore, and I remember when it changed. I was at EPA by that time, and Reagan said, government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem. And that's when things started to turn. I'd never use Amazon. And what's depressing now is that as a consumer, I feel I have no agency at all. I mean, I was cheated by Nationwide. Long story, I was cheated by Saks Fifth Avenue, and I called them and I said, I've been a customer for 45 years. And you didn't send what you were supposed to. I want a refund. And they said, no, you don't qualify or something. And I said, I'll never shop there again. And I never have. They don't care.
I mean, maybe we lost sight of the view in the Reagan era that there is such a thing of private power and the government needs to be on the side of the people. You know what I mean? And be a balance to it. It's not that, one of the problems, I admire the U.S. Constitution, but it underestimated private power, and in fact, political theory in general, private power is kind of new. I know we have a lot of questions, so maybe I'll skip some political theory, but like this
Certainly
challenge of private power is new. We've had tyrannical government, which is becoming a problem again, but we've had that problem for thousands and thousands of years. This problem of it's new, and we're trying to figure out. And I think we've lost the sight that the government needs to be a balance to it, and always needs to be on the side of the people. So thank you very much for that question.
Thank you.
Great talk. Look forward to reading your book, Ian Simmons. I'm an antitrust lawyer. I think this parallel universe that you described with people having dinner in the White House versus the case is still going is what's different than in Trump number 2 than Trump 1 is the idea of national champions and China. That's the way I'm perceiving that antitrust is antitrust now national industrial policy. If you agree with that, my question would be, if we are in this AI arms race against China, just like in the 60s we were in a, get to the moon first before the Russians, we knew who won that. We knew what the indicia of winning that was, who got to the moon first. What's the indicia of winning this AI arms race? Like how do you know when you've won it or not?
Reminds me of the 5G race. Remember that? I don't know. This is such an inside like baseball kind of comment. But remember there was a race to 5G, and I don't think ever they announced I think whoever spent more on it lost, basically.
There's a trophy waiting someplace.
I think whoever bid all that and that money. Anyway, I have very strong feelings about it. I think there's something to what you say. I do think there's a industrial policy aspect of things that feels different. In fact, I was hanging out with some Europeans, and they were saying, we don't really understand. I thought this was early on. They're like, I thought the Trump administration was against big tech, but they came over here to yell at us for like messing with big tech. So what's going on? And I said, well, they kind of don't like big tech, but they don't like Europe more. So they don't like Europe more, and like you need to shed this linear thinking. I said, and I'm saying like, and also trying to make things consistent is a big mistake. Like that's a classic error. So I want to say something about the policy. I don't have an answer for how you figure out who wins. I do have an answer for what our industrial policy should be, because I think the right comparison of this moment with China is not Russia, Soviet Union in the 60s, but Japan in the 70s and 80s. And during that period, everyone was saying, oh my God, Japan is like beating us. They're smarter. They're more centralized. They have these champions. And here we are. What do? We sued IBM and tried to break them up. And we did break up AT&T. We took our 2 biggest tech champions from the 70s and we blew them up. And then, Japan was still going hard with mainframe computers and so on, and they never broke up their own AT&T and TNT. And what do? We invented the personal computer. Then we invented when mobile computing, the internet, all this stuff happened. Internet came out. We broke up AT&T. So I think the best industrial policy, my antitrust friends will appreciate this, is antitrust. There we go.
No national champions.
I think this is the only town I can get applause for that line. But I even have a paper on that topic if you're interested. So
Washington is your world.
I hate to go from applause to pessimism, but I'm Courtney Radge. I'm the director of the Center for Journalism and Liberty at Open Markets Institute. Nice to see you, Tim. You said that you're optimistic because people and societies change, but we had the East Indian Company, right? We've had throughout our history, we've had genocides. We have a genocide in Gaza now. We have tech companies that are fused with, the state increasingly. So it's interesting to hear your optimism, but I guess I wonder, do you think that there is something fundamentally different about what's happening now because you have the platformization of everything? So everything goes through an intermediary that is also generative. It's creation And then you have to think about all of the other technologies, right? That they're also, it's not just the platforms we see, it's the underwater sea cables, the satellites, the flows of information, like literally the entire communication stack. So how do we even communicate a different vision? And not, like, you spoke a lot about the individual, but what seems to be different is that this is so structural now. Like, how can an individual do anything when you have this much concentration of power in a state techno-fascist situation?
Well, that's a pretty dark prognosis.
Should have gone before the other guy.
No, it's all right. I'll take it. I mean, it's difficult to be cheerful about how the 21st century has gone, I guess. It has been rocky. I was sort of thinking about it. The only thing you could say is it's been better than the first 25 years of the 20th century, but where you had another pandemic, but also even worse World War and all that kind of stuff. But what's that?
The Gilded Age.
Yeah. So it's been a rocky time, but if there's any cause for optimism, I do think that my optimism is slightly more long-term and has to do with the sense we're in a reckoning. We're in a serious reckoning now as to how we can do better. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But I think even like being aware of how seriously bad. I was reading today some terrible stat about the number of people in the world living under autocracy right now, because democracies, this is slightly different from my book, but related because I think that the road to serfdom, I have a chapter in the book about the real road to serfdom, and I think that tolerance of monopoly and excessive extraction, I'm not the only person to say this, but another meaning of the word extraction is if you tolerate excessive extraction by an elite, that tends to lead to nations to fail. That quoting from another book. And tends, I think, to lead the people to ask for someone who can really serve them, right? So I think we need to wake up to the fact that our failure to deal with private power and monopoly has, in many ways, led us in this situation. And I guess that's what I'm optimistic about. How's that?
Right.
Hi, Kevin Erickson with Future of Music Coalition. I'm really glad to see you using this language of wealth extraction because I use it all the time. I've especially been using it to talk about ticketing with both Live Nation and Ticketmaster, but also all these other platforms.
That's the example I should use, not the airline. Although there is something more voluntary.
Yeah, well, so it also works for StubHub and SeatGeek and Vivid Seats and all these secondary platforms as well. And we had a bill up before the DC City Council 2 weeks ago, and it sort of played out in this familiar pattern. It was a bill that the musicians and the independent venues put together, and then you see people like Diana Moss get up and say, "Oh, don't listen to these musicians and independent venues. They're just gonna." Their policy ideas will just help Ticketmaster, and then StubHub has this parade of academics that they trot out, and it's sort of the same thing. We've experienced the same thing at the federal level. So my question is, like, to the extent that there's this idea that this moment in antitrust is supposed to have been about centering the voices of workers in small businesses, how do you think we're doing? And can we do better, and what do we need to do
we need to do
get better?
I mean, I think we need to expand the program to realize we have a massive problem of extraction across the economy and limit, I think if anything, I like I'm an antitrust person, but sometimes it can be a little too fine-grained and specific. I think that to respond to our times, to respond to affordability crisis is dealing with the fact, as this woman over here was saying, is that people in their daily lives feel economically abused, by life's essentials, by things they need like medicine or healthcare or rent or the very. Not starting I'm running for office, but I believe it, the stuff that we've just kind of let ourselves wander into an era where we think that it's just fine to have. And it's not unethical anymore. I mean, I think ethics used to have a greater role in preventing this. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry, people would be like, well, we can't raise the prices like that because that would be evil. But I think that's gone. And so I think being on a much broader search for this problem of market power extraction and fighting it is really key to our age. So yes, in any form. Thanks. Hey, how's it going?
Beth Balton.
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit
Why don't
about.
you say a little bit about your we worked together in the White House.
We did. We worked in the Biden House, White House. I worked for the U.S. Trade Representative, which relates to my question, which is about data. Mm-hmm. Data and AI and who controls the data. And we saw the United States just sign 2 agreements that call for the free flow of data across borders without any of the protections that we've seen in other agreements. So nothing to make sure that the companies that are acquiring the data protected against being sent on to China or Russia or elsewhere. How can we think about, in the age of extraction, data and company control, corporate control over data, especially once you introduce the border?
Yes. Well, the border adds another complication. I think that, frankly, you know this topic better than I do, but I will just return to the general sense that we have, when we speak of extraction, the older version of it was just sort of money or maybe resources, but we have to be very cognizant of what are the valuable assets of our time and how control of those assets is centralized. And I think data is like number one in that story. And I guess I'll leave it there. Yeah. Well, this is like a parade of old friends. How's it going?
Whoops. Hi, Art Brodsky, now retired and grandfather. When you think of AI as a discrete technology, it's sort of one thing, but when you see what else is going on, like the concentration of media ownership, I just wonder if whatever effects it has are magnified by sort of the concentration that's going on in the rest of the economy, whether it improves, their ability to extract or improves everybody else's ability to extract, and sort of where the end game goes with all this concentration of power and computing and media.
In the optimistic 1990s, there was this. We look back at the mistakes we made, and somewhere along the line, someone said it started to be believed that it didn't matter. The old ownership limits were dated. That it didn't matter how concentrated various forms of power were, and everything was obsolete, and we were going to do better in terms. And I think that I guess we need to rethink and the wisdom of some of what happened during the New Deal and the progressive era. Where sort of Louis Brandeis inspired people, frankly, like Frankfurter during that time, went beyond antitrust and said we need to make sure the most important assets for democracy and for this country do not end up in too few hands. And for a long time, we kind of held to that. And then we kind of got so optimistic we beat the Soviet Union, we're when nothing go wrong, and like that stuff doesn't matter. And I think that was our mistake.
Hi, I'm Hannah Lipstein. I work at the Data and Society Research Institute, and I study the environmental impacts of large computing infrastructures and technology generally. I won't say AI. But when you were talking about whether there will be resistance that comes from people and sort of a cultural groundswell, it made me think about the amount of resistance that's coming around, data centers especially, but just as big tech starts to sort of consume and extract more of general sectors of the economy, energy, land, supply chains. Can you imagine that that actually becomes a serious lever of wresting back power and creating a kind of resistance? Like I'm sometimes more optimistic than other times, but I wonder if you see that happening in any way.
Well, it's something interesting. The politics and geopolitics of data centers have been very interesting. You're probably interested in the story of Chile and what's going on there, but I've been living in the UK this semester on sabbatical, and it was very interesting to watch how excited the officials and others were about becoming the centers for data centers. Now, and I was like, this is kind of like being invited to a party and realizing you're there to serve the drinks. And, you guys, the United Kingdom, I was like, you guys actually were way ahead of the United States. If you go back and look at AI research, it's a period where France and the United Kingdom were ahead of the United States. The United States was stuck on some sort of old theory. It's in the book, actually, the theory of, in France, and they kind of just blew their lead and sold most of the human capital in DeepMind. Other companies sold them mostly to Google, some to Facebook. And now they're kind of dealing with they're at the kind of bottom end of this thing and trying to sort of make a big. They're very excited, and countries are so desperate to be involved in the AI revolution, so they're happy to become frankly, to subsidize their own economic exploitation. So it's an interesting. It's an interesting thing because obviously the main profits are not going to stay local. It's kind of obvious. Obviously it's construction jobs. It's hard to be upset as a country about investment. But some of these investments are very big, so I can understand why countries generally are. But when you think about just the UK, because I'm an example of it, like they could have been, at the head of this thing. Whether that will be a source of resistance, I don't know enough about political movements to know. In Chile, it seems to have had some impact, I guess.
So do you want to come to the mic? Actually, or you can yell it. Fine.
Okay, yeah. Tim and I also used to work together.
Yes.
Old friends.
This feels like that show. This is your life. There's this whole where they bring people from your past to. Anyway.
My question is around industrial policy. You're talking about antitrust and not wanting national champions, and the question is, we've seen in recent months a lot of equity stakes in a number of companies.
Yeah.
And I was kind of wondering what you think of that and how that fits into antitrust issues and national champions. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I don't think those are great ideas. I disagree with some of my friends think so, like Barry Lynn. But I worry about becoming a command economy. This might make me sound like old school sort of Republican, but I'm not sure that I trust this White House to make the best decisions about what to invest in or to save Intel. I mean, if Intel is really doomed, maybe they need to be replaced. Maybe they need to lose. I don't think it's a good idea. I think, I guess, going back to this, theory of antitrust is the best industrial policy. I think we've done the best when, like with an Olympic athlete or something, we realize they need to train and fight. When we train our Olympic athletes, we don't say, don't do anything. We you got to fight against the best people. And I've always thought for the United States tech industry, what has made it so strong is that it's competitive. It's a fight. And we're going in a totally different direction now where we're like, well, you're the friend of the president. And Silicon Valley's become obsessed with becoming government contractors. And you're the best, you're our company. And I just think it's against the tradition of this country. So I think it's a bad idea. Yeah.
All right, David, you're going to close it out.
Okay. David Gossett, tech lawyer and old friend of Tim's. So
you didn't have to be an old friend to ask a question, by the way. It wasn't that.
I just stood up at the mic.
Yeah.
So it's a little unfair because I haven't actually read the book yet. So, but the book's entitled about tech platforms, and today you've talked about Amazon and other sort of platforms, eBay, Etsy, that kind of platform, which are sort of for goods. But you've also talked about energy and pharma and such, which are clearly extractive situations. But when we talk about tech platforms today, we usually, most people, when they use that, are thinking about social media platforms and such. And you've mentioned X, Twitter, but you really haven't explained how this analysis works in the sort of social media arena, which is, I mean, it ties in very obviously to your attention economy points, but I don't quite see how that's an extractive industry in the same way.
Well, I think, I think it's roughly the same. Okay, so let me say more than one thing. So some of the social media platforms are much more relevant as speech platforms than they are as economic platforms. Twitter being a good example, where Twitter never really made much money, and it's more important. As for the advertising-driven ones, I think it's basically the same. You have the model where you try to get people to come, hang around, stay there as long as possible, and then what you extract from them is human attention. And actually, I had another book, Attention Merchants, kind of about the development of that business model. And you try to hoard up as much as possible so you can charge the sellers a monopoly price. The extraction is of an asset called human attention and time, and the monopoly sort of wealth part of it is from the advertisers. So that the people are paying for it. So that's, I guess, how I'd put the model together. But I do think, just to finish on this, there is the speech part is really quite important. And it's another area where we kind of, like, without thinking, said, all right, well, we have these are becoming the major, like the Greek Agora or the Roman Forum. This is where people give this is where politics happens. And we're like, oh, okay, we'll just let we'll let billionaires buy them whenever they want and devote them to every purpose. And, that was crazy. I mean, maybe there was no obvious way to stop it in antitrust, but it's kind of crazy to think that these essentially public spaces can be controlled by private parties with a very strong. I mean, imagine, we just let people buy town square and say, okay, and you can only talk here, or have their own speech policies. Anyway, I'll leave that kind of there. And you guys have a great audience. So many friends coming out. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tim.